A couple of days ago, on Friday, I believe, the United Nations Security Council held a meeting on Syria, and well, some allegations were thrown around by the Syrian government representatives and the Russian government representatives that perhaps the UK was involved in supporting terrorist groups within Syria, and this garnered a bit of a response from the British representative there, Karen Pierce. Now, Britain holds the presidency of the Security Council at the moment, so she is Madam President. But this is what she had to say.
And I want to say again in this chamber that attacks on the West and attempts to portray us as harbouring terrorists or somehow on the side of terrorists, this really does need to cease. We are trying hard to assist the UN in bringing peace to Syria. We are giving money on the humanitarian side to that end. We do not deserve, nor are the attacks in the chamber warranted, to say, and I quote, that we are fighting on the side of terrorists. And if this were repeated outside this chamber as individuals, there would be legal action taken on that statement. So I hope we will hear no more about it. It's a calumny and it's untrue, like so many of the other things that have been said about the situation in Syria from the two countries represented to my right.
The hypocrisy is unbelievable.
Because what would Syria and Russia know? They've just been cleaning up terrorists for the last 4 or 5 years in Syria. What would they know about that problem? So this is interesting. Karen Pierce is basically saying, stop it, don't say this anymore, or we will sue you, in some Magnitsky type fashion. More on that later.
Yes.
But in terms of terrorism, I mean, what side is Britain on? Well, we can also say what side what side is NATO on, Mike? Here's an article. This is a report that we published at 21st Century Wire here, evidence of Turkey's war crimes in Syria. But here's the kicker: ISIS members within its ranks. And notice the 4 flags we have on screen there, Mike. Turkey, NATO member, NATO's flag, the Free Syrian Army, which has been rebranded to the Syrian National Army, quite facetiously, I might add, and then ISIS. So there are ISIS members under NATO command today as we speak, verified. That's what this and many other reports have also backed this up as well. So this is a number of mainstream reports as well that are referenced in addition to what we have in that report, Mike. So that's just one example, but let's not stop there. Let's just remind Ambassador, or Madam President, I should say, Pierce, about this story, which appeared on the BBC in 2017. UK foreign aid money diverted to extremists, I think we can use the word terrorists in there, in single quotes, in Syria. This is the BBC, by the way. And just for people who can't read that headline, if you are nearsighted, we'll just blow that up a little bit. UK foreign aid money diverted to extremists in Syria. That's for Madam President. And that's the BBC, by the way. So if, I mean, well, the BBC has its faults, but once in a while they do break an interesting and useful story from time to time, every 2 years or so. So, but that's only the beginning, Mike. I mean, if we really want to get into Britain's support, the U.S. support, the coalition support for what they call the rebels, I think it's abundantly clear. It's well documented. British special forces are training cohorts of rebels for years in Jordan, in Turkey, all over the place, in Syria itself, active in Syria, Mike. And many of these people are listed terrorists, prescribed terrorist organizations. So I don't think she has very strong ground there.
No, and indeed, criticizing any other country for telling lies about any other country. Britain has been pretty vociferous in its lie-telling with respect to Russia, not only with respect to Donald Trump, and more recently Russiagate UK, as it seems to be developing at the moment, but we might bring Skripal into this, or the OPCW. Or the
OPCW. That brings us nicely to our next story here, and this came out, if you've been following the OPCW story, you'll know about the 2 whistleblowers that have come forward. This email appeared on WikiLeaks. They've just released this secret internal email from the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, OPCW, whistleblower, a member of the fact-finding mission team sent to Duma in Syria after the alleged chemical weapons attack in April of 2018, accused the OPCW management of doctoring the report on the incident and distorting the facts. Here's the email, Mike. This is available online on Twitter. And let's just pull one quote out, which I think is very instructive. This is from the whistleblower talking to Robert Fairweather, his superior. After reading this modified report, he's talking about the one that was submitted was modified, which incidentally, no other team member who deployed into Syria has had an opportunity to do. I was struck by how much it misrepresents the facts. So now let's just move on here. Here's the other problems that have been exposed recently from the other whistleblowers. Intimidation by unknown U.S. agents who are allowed inside the OPCW's office, seem to be intimidating members of staff and engineers of what conclusions to come to. In other words, it's Assad who did the chemical weapons attack in Duma. So a fraudulent report was released blaming Assad, and this sexed up report has been used to justify the US, UK, French military action in Syria at the time. That's the main problem with this, because that report was used absolutely by heads of state. Theresa May gave a grand speech in the aftermath of this, and so you play that speech and you look at that measured against what we know now in terms of information. They went and launched a military strike before any investigation took place. And Karen Pierce, Madam President in the UN, is lecturing people about who's telling the truth and who's not, is pretty ghastly, actually. I just want to also add this OPCW aha moment, Mike. This is the bureau chief from The Hague for AFP. His name is Danny Kemp. And this is what he said about this email this morning. Western source notes that the Russians are particularly sensitive regarding Duma because it happened close to where their own troops were operating. He's talking about in Duma in 2018. Also worth noting, Mueller highlighted WikiLeaks' role in publishing Russian-hacked DNC documents. Plus, Russia was accused of hacking the OPCW last year. So this is what the bureau chief at AFP is saying in response to the release of this whistleblower email. He's basically saying, don't look at the email because WikiLeaks is involved and probably the Russians. That's the bureau chief of AFP.
Wow.
In The Hague.
Do you think he really believes that?
I think he does. Otherwise, I don't think he would have tweeted that. I really think this is somebody who doesn't really understand the story, hasn't followed it, and is claiming that there was evidence in the Mueller probe that a proof of Russian hacking, and the Russians hacked the DNC and then handed those emails to WikiLeaks. That was not proven in the Mueller probe. So it's kind of astonishing that it's such a high-profile bureau chief of a major global news agency would make remarks that are factually incorrect, and also more than that, trying to basically warn people off the story, running interference. Essentially, it's quite interesting. So you can go on Twitter and read that thread. It's very interesting indeed.